Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Lord Monckton, noted international pro-life campaigner. Christopher, welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Gavin.
You've enjoyed some of our lovely weather here?
I must say, faced with the prospect of going back to the Scottish winter, when I was asked would I please extend my tour by a further month and now by a further month, so I'm doing 3 months down in Oz instead of 1, I said, where do I sign?
Well, enjoy your suffering.
It's tough. Somebody's got to do it.
They do indeed. So you would probably say of yourself that you've had a blessed life, born in good circumstances, good family?
Yes, born of a very ancient family. We can go back to certainly 1296, descending all the way, and on my mother's side we can go back to the 9th century. So you really are in the presence of greatness today, but in my case only inherited. But my father was the army's youngest general, and my mother was the first woman High Sheriff of Kent since the Middle Ages. And so I had a rather chaotic existence to start with, because in my first 16 years we moved house, I think 17 or 18 times, following my father's army career around the world. Then I went to Harrow School and then Cambridge University, where I studied classical architecture, at least I think that's what it was. I spent most of my time enjoying myself, to be honest, but then that's part of the education you get. Yes. And then to University College Cardiff to do a postgraduate course in journalism, and then I had a long career in journalism, but I took time out from 1982 to 1986 to give advice to Margaret Thatcher as a member of her 6-man policy unit at 10 Downing Street.
Good. Now, you also have the title Viscount
Monckton of Brenchley, and you have to work, of course, really hard in order to get these titles. What I had to do was to choose my parents carefully. Yes. My father inherited the title from his father, and that's how it works in a hereditary peerage. But my father had the right to sit and vote in the House of Lords taken away from him in 1999, when nearly all the hereditary peers were thrown out because the Labour Party thought that it wasn't cool to have people sitting in Parliament who had not been appointed by the Prime Minister to sit there. Yes. So my father was thrown out. So I have never sat or voted in the House of Lords, but am still, by this curious constitutional anomaly, a member of it. So, but if I call myself a member of it, the Clerk of the Parliament gets very upset, because he says membership is defined in the Act of Parliament of 1999 as the right to sit and vote, and you don't have that, so you're not a member. I say, it says in my passport, I'm the Viscount Monckton of Brenchley, and you've just written to me as Dear Lord Monckton, so I'm going to call myself a member of the House of Lords, and what are you going to do about it? And they found there was nothing they could do about it.
In your journalist years, you had an interesting or humorous moment when, was it the editor that had...
well, I wrote a leading article for the Yorkshire Post. I was, at the age of 22, I was their junior leader writer. There were 2 leader writers, the chief leader writer and me. And Tom Greenwell, the chief leader writer, he'd been in the spooks department of the Foreign Office for many, many years, fighting communism mostly, which was the big problem at that time, and to a very large extent probably still is, though it's no longer driven by the KGB, obviously. Well, I was writing a leader one day, and it was about the Queen's Christmas message, saying congratulations, she'd given a good message that year. And the Queen had obviously rather liked this, because the next thing that happened was that Buckingham Palace invited the editor of the Yorkshire Post to lunch at the palace. See, my name didn't appear on the article, it was just a leading article in the name of the Yorkshire Post, so he was the one that got invited to Buckingham Palace. And he came and flopped into a chair and put his head in his hands, and he said, "Oh no," he said. He said, "You know I'm not a social animal. I don't move in your kind of circles. Royalty and aristocracy, all that sort of stuff, bores me to tears. I don't know why I put up with you at all," he said, "and now you've got me into this." And he said, "What happens when we've done the soup and we've done the fish, and she looks at me and I look at her, and we've done the weather and we've done the cricket, and we can't think of a thing to say to each other, and there am I sitting at her lunch table, just her and me. What on earth do I say?" I said, "Oh, that's easy. Just explain that one of your leader writers is her 7th cousin twice removed." So he groans as though, "Don't be so silly, Monckton," and stumps off to London. Comes back, flops into a chair again. "Oh no," he said. I said, "How did it go?" Not everybody gets the chance to have lunch with the Queen. He said, "Well," he said, "we did the soup, we did the fish. We did the weather, we did the cricket. She looked at me, I looked at her. Neither of us could think of a thing to say to each other. And I said the one thing I was determined not to say. I said, 'Oh, Ma'am, do you realise one of my leader writers is your seventh cousin twice removed?' And he swears that she said, 'Oh, really? Well, kindly have him removed a third time.'"
Well, today we don't want you to be removed anywhere, but there are things that you'd like to remove from the law. What's happening here?
Well, let's start here in the state of Victoria, where in 2008, the Labour Party, having got an unexpectedly large majority, decided to use it to pass legislation which was directly contrary to the Judeo-Christian system of universal values, which the West and Australia in particular were founded upon. The left have always hated Christianity. They've always hated it because it encourages people to think for themselves. And the whole point about totalitarianism, which is what the left essentially represent, is that only one view, the so-called politically correct view, or as I call it rather more bluntly and perhaps rather more accurately, the Communist Party line, that is the only view that they want anyone to have. And they say on matters like taking the life of children in the womb, that's okay because it's going to annoy the Christians. They don't very much care about the fact that they're allowing the killing of little children and the torturing of them before they kill them. They don't care about any of that. They care about doing down Christianity and showing who's boss and establishing a quite unpleasant and sinister totalitarian regime here in Victoria and eventually right across Australia. One of the things I was asked to do by the evangelical churches of Melbourne when they invited me here was to see if I could find a way to start rolling back that hideous law of 2008 by which it was said that you could kill any baby up to birth itself.
Lord Monckton, let's take a break here and we'll come back to that. You're watching Support Life and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Lord Monckton. Christopher, thank you again. And we were talking about a hideous law. What can we do about it?
First step is whenever the existing law is not being correctly enforced and the lack of enforcement is a life and death matter, enforce the existing law. That's always the first step. Do the easiest thing first. And at the moment, the law in Victoria allows the life of children to be taken not just up to 17 weeks, when arguably there's at least a case that they might not be able to feel pain when they're that young, but also from 17 weeks gestation onwards all the way up till birth, when they clearly can feel pain, and a lot of testing has established this now. And because of this, the methods that they are using, which do not involve specifically anaesthetising the child separately from any anaesthetic that may have been administered to the mother, and it isn't always administered to the mother, as you know, these children are going to feel their own death agony. They're going to experience it, they're going to feel it, they're going to be awake, they're going to be alert, they will feel the pain, they'll feel it more acutely than you or I would, and they won't know why, and they will die in screaming agony. Now, is this what a civilised society allows? Of course it isn't. In fact, in 2010, 2 years after the 2008 law was passed allowing the baby butchering and torturing to go on, the federal parliament in Canberra passed the criminal law amendment, open brackets, torture prohibition and death penalty abolition, close brackets, Act 2010, which specifically prohibits causing discriminatory and extreme pain or suffering to any person. Now, for the purpose of the torture legislation, a person is a member of our race that's capable of feeling pain. It matters not whether the child has been born or not, it matters whether the child feels pain or not. And so for that legislation, a child is a person, and that legislation therefore prohibits the abortion of children that have not first been given an anaesthetic. So we are going to write this week to the leaders of the political parties now represented in the state of Victoria and say to them, you are consenting to and acquiescing in the torture of little children discriminated against solely on the ground that they haven't been born yet, so that they feel the pain and suffering of their own death agony, which can go on, incidentally, depending on the method used, for up to 24 hours. Can you imagine letting a little child lie there with no treatment, no water, no food, no love, no nothing for 24 hours until he or she dies in some pan room in a cupboard somewhere, or under the cold glare of the strip lights and the still colder glare of its butchers? This is what goes on here in the state of Victoria, in the abortion clinics, in the hospitals. And the doctors who once in the old days would have taken the Hippocratic Oath, which contains a specific condemnation of abortion, they don't take that oath anymore. They are prepared to sit there and let these children be tortured because they don't want to be reminded by giving the child its own anaesthetic that they're killing a living being capable of feeling pain and suffering. That's why the legislature refused to pass the amendment to make sure the children weren't tortured. So when I was asked, is there anything other than what we're already doing that we can do to start addressing this problem, I said, yes, the first thing is that children are being tortured. This is against the law. It must be stopped at once. And the simplest way to stop it is for the legislature to pass an emergency law saying that in future every abortionist must administer a separate anaesthetic into just an injection into the thigh of every little child of 17 weeks gestation or more, so that they don't feel the pain of the procedure that will kill them. And does this mean we're going soft on abortion? No, it doesn't. It's the first step. You start out by winning that one and making them change the law that both parties have now said they will have no intention of changing. And then that opens up the logjam, because the moment everyone present at what they delicately call a procedure, and what I'm going to call what it is, which is murder, they will see this anaesthetic being administered to the child separately. They will know what this means, and they will be made, every time that so-called procedure happens, to come to understand exactly what they're doing. And it's in that climate that you can begin to make even these hideous, uncaring, brutal socialist and green legislators realize the horror of what they have done. And I don't believe that people don't have a conscience. I simply believe they don't have a very well-informed conscience. I don't think that most of these Labour people or Green people have the slightest idea of the scale of the pain and the extremity of the pain and suffering that they cause in killing these children.
Now, just on this point of aborting, we're aborting the conscience of doctors who have taken a Hippocratic Oath.
Well, let's come on to this second problem, which is at least already being addressed here in Victoria. As best the Life Coalition can address it. If you talk to, say, Terry Kelleher, who is the chairman of that coalition, and she's a lawyer who is very strong on the outrageous consequences of allowing the law to forbid Christian, Muslim or Jewish doctors, because all the faiths have the same objection, and so I think to the Hindus and the Buddhists I heard today. So it may be that just about all the religions have a sense of the value of human life, and they don't allow this to happen. But the legislators viciously, because it is a vicious law, this abortion law, they viciously refused to give to doctors the right to say, I will play no part in procuring an abortion, because that's what the words of the Hippocratic Oath are. And I will not even refer you to another doctor who will do an abortion. Go and find your own doctor. I'm not playing. They're not allowed to do that. Now that is a staggering failure. Actually, it's a failure of your constitution. Your constitution is a bureaucratic document written largely to please the diplomats and bureaucrats and not to give proper rights to the citizens of Australia. And it lamentably doesn't give the citizen of Australia the right to life. It doesn't give them the right to freedom of religion. It doesn't give them the right to freedom of conscience. All of these things until now have been enjoyed without being part of the Constitution. But the weakness of the Constitution is now ruthlessly exposed by these hideous people in the Victoria legislature, who are willing to say to doctors, and there's one already who has gallantly, and God bless all those who do stand out against this, has gallantly refused, notwithstanding that this could end his career. He has refused to participate in an abortion. And what they did, they began sending couples to every doctor in the state to see who would comply. Yeah. That's how ruthless these people are. And they sent them to him, and he said, I'm very sorry, but on my own conscience, I can't do this.
Yes.
And you must go somewhere else, and I am not prepared to send you anywhere else. You make your own choice. And so they reported him. And he now faces disciplinary action. I'm not quite clear whether it's from his medical association or from the Victorian Parliament or quite what. Either way, he risks being deregistered as a doctor here in Victoria, which ends his career here.
Yeah. Well,
now, this is outrageous.
Yes. Well, Christopher, just on that outrageous note, we'll take a break. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Lord Monckton. Christopher, we're covering quite a few subjects here, and I'd like to move across into science. And I'd like to put one of your hats on a peg, which was science and global warming.
Yes, I'm notorious, I suppose is probably the right word, for going around the world saying to everybody from the US Congress to the Australian Prime Minister that it would be a good idea not to worry too much about man's effect on the climate, because it's going to be a very small effect. And I've published several papers in the reviewed literature explaining why this is the case. But I think rather than going too much on that, we might just say in passing there's been no global warming according to the RSS satellite data set for 18 years and 1 month, which is not exactly what they were all predicting, and it's not what the ABC or the Melbourne Age will be telling you, but there hasn't been much for a very long time. But what is interesting behind all this debate on global warming is the status of science itself. You see, when the world was created and God said, let there be light, and there was light, we now know, thanks to science, that there was a moment of creation. And the atheist scientists in the 1920s, when this was first discovered, they were horrified. In the 1950s, under Fred Hoyle at Cambridge, a huge campaign was mounted to try to do down what is now what's called the standard model of the universe, that says there was a moment of creation. And if you get a scientist who says, well, of course, you believe there's a God, but I don't, and I'm a scientist, we'll say, yes, you're a scientist, but it's because you're a scientist that you know you can't tell us exactly what happened at the moment of creation, because the laws of physics came into being just a tiny fraction of a second after that. And therefore they do not reach back to the moment of creation itself, and you can't see or work out by any method what it was or who it was that created the Big Bang, from which we now pretty much know that the whole universe sprang. And this gets them very upset, because of course it's true, and it was Max Planck who first established what's known as Planck's distance or Planck's wall. You can't cross it to find out what happened at the moment of creation, because having the universe having been created, only then were the laws by which it is to unfold created. And so the laws of physics and of chemistry and of biology, these laws were established by whoever or whatever created the universe. In other words, as the universe unfolds or evolves, it does so in accordance with the laws that have been laid down right from the beginning, as you and I would believe by Almighty God, and as others might believe by some entirely unknown agency, by some sort of accident of the particles of matter moving around and colliding. A very unexciting and rather drab way of looking at it. But the seeker after truth, as Abu Ali ibn al-Haytham used to call it, the seeker after truth, he said, and he was the founder of the scientific method in the East, as Thales of Miletus was in the West. and he called the scientist the seeker after truth, does not put his faith in any mere supposed consensus, however fashionable. Instead, he subjects what he has learnt of it to his hard-won scientific knowledge, and to inspection, inquiry, investigation, scrutiny, checking again. The road to the truth, and that's where truth keeps cropping up in his definition. The word to the truth, says Al-Haytham, the road to the truth is long and hard, and that is the road that we must follow. And there is a very good inspirational message to scientists. Don't come and preach to us that global warming is a problem, because actually it isn't. And don't preach to us that science can supplant religion. This is your first attempt as scientists to do so, and you've got it wrong, and it's unimpressive. So go back into your box and do your research with that correct approach to science, which is a sense of wonder. And all good science doesn't start, as all good religion does, with "I believe," because science isn't religion. Science is a process of enquiry, not of revelation. And so the correct word for the scientist is "I wonder." A scientist should both have curiosity and awe. Both of those are encapsulated in the word wonder. That's what science is about.
Yes. Now, you had a period of time in your life, some 25 years, where illness had struck you down. And in this quietness, you must have expressed some awe and wonder and looked at how that time was going to be redeemed. Where did it take you?
Well, I was very sick for 25 years, in and out of bed, in and out of hospital, endless series of operations as one bit after another kind of fell apart and had to be taken out and thrown away. And in the end it got to the point where there was so little left to go wrong that I suppose I've been spared. But we did have a long time trying to find out what might be wrong. In the end I found out what was wrong by mathematics. There were too many things wrong with me for them to be existing independently in one corpse. There was no way, probability-wise, that that could have happened. I did the probability calculation, took it to the professor and said, look, there must be a common cause. So we searched for an obvious common cause, given the pattern of things that I had wrong with me. It wasn't that. We looked for another cause. I said, well, it's bound to be an infection, isn't it? That's the most likely common cause of multiple failures. So that rather grudgingly, the professor said yes, and we tested for that and couldn't find anything. So I said, but is there some general cure that we can give for infections that would work against many infections, so at least we have a chance of just killing it without even knowing what it is we're killing? And he said, well, not really. But then we had to think between us, and we did find something. And the National Health Service refused to let me have it, so I made it for myself and took it. And 2 minutes after the second dose, 25 years of illness went just as though I'd been touched by an angel, and I knew I was better. And so did my wife, who was watching.
Wow. So that had given you some time with your wife that most men miss?
Far more time with my lovely wife than would normally get, which is wonderful for me and not at all so wonderful for her, poor thing. But she had to stick with me, not only for better, for worse, for richer or poorer, but also for lunch. And she was very good. She did all this beautifully and magnificently, stood by me all the way through this terrible illness, and was actually present and saw me as I got better, which was a wonderful moment.
In a concluding comment, what would you say to our audience?
Love is the centre of the Judeo-Christian disposition. The commandments of Christ to love God and love your neighbour are both rooted in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament of the Bible, from which he is quoting. And that is what we should do. And if we hold fast to the idea that we should love one another as much as we love ourselves and love God as well, everything else will come right. If you do your best, God does the rest.
Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you, Gavin.
You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.